From the thick haze of hospital waiting rooms to the rattling lack of rear seatbelts, 1970s Britain felt entirely lawless. These are things that were normal in the 1970s UK but are now illegal. But today, half of it would land you in a cell. Smoking everywhere. The Great British Smog. If you walked into a British shop or a bus in the 70s, you were basically breathing through a thick gray blanket of tobacco. It wasn't only a pub thing, it was an everywhere thing. You'd jump on the top deck of a bus and the air would be so thick with smoke you'd struggle to see the no spitting sign at the front. Even the local hospital wasn't a safe zone. You'd literally be sitting in a plastic chair waiting for an X-ray while the person next to you puffed away on a Woodbine. The ceilings in every single cafe and post office was this nasty, sticky shade of a nicotine yellow, a color that just doesn't exist anymore. Even doctors would chat about your health while flicking ash into a tray right next to your medical files. It's hard to wrap your head around it now, but lighting up in a crowded cinema or a grocery store was as normal as checking the weather. Today, the Health Act 2006 makes that a fast track to a hefty fine, but back then, the whole country was just one giant ashtray. The drink drive limit. One for the road. Back in the 70s, the limit for driving home from the pub was basically whenever you could find your car keys. There was no real social stigma attached to it. You'd watch people stagger out of a working men's club, climb into a Ford Cortina, and drive off while waving at the local copper. The 1967 Road Safety Act had technically introduced the breathalyzer, but in the 70s, felt more like a suggestion than a strict rule. People would brag about driving better after 3 or 4 pints of bitter. It sounds insane now, but it was just part of the culture. Having one for the road was practically a polite requirement before heading home. There were no massive think campaigns or high-tech roadside units yet, just a lot of luck and a shocking amount of metal-on-metal accidents. Today, if you tried that, you'd lose your license and probably your job before you hit the end of the high street. If you managed to stay on the road, your passengers were still rattling around inside like loose change. Seatbelt optional. The human projectile. If you were a kid in the back of a Vauxhall Viva in the 70s, you weren't strapped into a 5-point harness. You were basically cargo. Seatbelts weren't mandatory to wear until 1983, so most people just didn't bother. That generation viewed them as a nuisance that crumpled your shirt. As a kid, you'd be sliding around on the vinyl bench seat every time the car took a corner. Or worse, you'd be lying across the rear parcel shelf like a piece of luggage. There were no Isofix points or bulky plastic boosters. If your dad had to slam on the brakes, you were definitely going for a flight into the dashboard. It's scary to think about now, but you used to pack 6 or 7 people into a car meant for 4, with half of them sitting on each other's laps. Today, if the police catch you with an unrestrained child, you're looking at a massive fine and a court date. But in the 70s, clunk click every trip was just a catchy slogan that most people ignored. Workplace hazard pay. The asbestos era. Workshops and building sites were thick with a white dust that we know was a death sentence. Asbestos was the miracle material found in everything from ceiling tiles to ironing boards. If you were a tradesman, you were handling the stuff with your bare hands, often while leaning in close to get a better look at what you were cutting. Safety gear? That was basically just a flat cap and a cigarette. Nobody was wearing respirators or high-grade filters. You just wiped the dust off your overalls and went home to your family. Even after the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974 came in, the casual attitude was hard to break. It wasn't until decades later that the true horror of mesothelioma and lung disease started catching up with that generation. Handling that material today without a full decontamination suit is a massive criminal offense. But in the 70s, it was just another Tuesday on the tools. While your lungs were taking a beating at work, your front rooms were under siege from the dreaded detector van. The TV licensed detector vans. The mere mention of a TV licensed detector van could send a whole street into a blind panic in the 70s. These big, clunky vans with massive antennas on the roof would crawl down the road, and everyone convinced themselves they could see through the walls. It was a national obsession. People would literally dive behind the sofa and switch off the telly if they spotted one turning the corner. Even though the technology was mostly just a basic radio receiver, the BBC marketing made it seem like they had CIA-level surveillance. The enforcement was aggressive. You'd get unannounced, intimidating knocks on the door and interrogation-style questioning on your own doorstep. Under modern privacy and human rights laws, that kind of heavy-handed, unannounced pressure has been significantly reined in. It was pure psychological warfare on the British public. And while fear of the van was bad, there was something worse in the headmaster's cupboard. If this reminds you of the good old days, hit subscribe and like the video. It helps us keep these memories alive. Corporal punishment, the school cane. In the 70s, assault was just a standard part of the school curriculum. If you played up in class or forgot your homework, you weren't given a timeout. You were sent to the headmaster's office to wait for the cane. Every kid knew that specific, agonizing dread of standing in the corridor, hearing the cupboard open, and the swish of the bamboo through the air. It wasn't just the cane either. The slipper or a heavy wooden ruler were common tools of the trade. Teachers had the legal right to physically strike you, and most of the time, if you complained to your parents, you'd get another slap for upsetting the teacher. It was state-sanctioned violence that left kids with welted hands and bruised backsides. This wasn't outlawed in state schools until 1986, ending a brutal era where the threat of physical pain was the primary way to keep a classroom in order. Unregulated adventure playgrounds. If you took a modern health and safety inspector back to a 1970s playground, they'd probably have a heart attack on the spot. There was no rubber mulch or soft-touch plastic. There was junk playgrounds made of jagged iron and splintered wood. You'd climb a 15-foot ladder made of rusted scaffolding to reach a slide that was basically a sheet of burning hot metal. If you fell off the top, there was no safety net. Just a solid slab of unforgiving concrete waiting below. The roundabouts were the worst. They were heavy, cast iron beasts that built up terrifying speed. If you slipped, you weren't just getting a grazed knee. You were risking a limb getting caught in the unguarded mechanical gap underneath. It was survival of the fittest in its purest form. Modern ROSPA guidelines would shut these places down in 10 minutes today. But back then, a trip to A&E for stitches was just considered a successful Saturday afternoon. You were dodging tetanus on the swings, but the real danger was hiding inside your living room sofas. Fire safety? What fire safety? The 1970s British home was a literal tinderbox waiting for a spark. You loved that warm glow of orange patterned decor, but it was incredibly lethal. Almost every sofa and armchair was stuffed with cheap, untreated polyurethane foam. If a stray cigarette ash hit that fabric, the whole room didn't just catch fire. It erupted into a wall of black, toxic smoke. You had about 2 minutes to get out before the fumes knocked you sideways. There were no mandatory smoke alarms, no fire-rated doors in houses, and absolutely zero regulations on what your furniture was made of. It was a reality that didn't change until the 1988 Furniture and Furnishings regulations finally made fire-resistant materials the law. You lived in homes filled with solid petrol designed as comfy cushions, completely unaware that your favorite armchair was a chemical bomb just waiting for a loose match to set it off. Do you think we've become too obsessed with safety? Or are you just glad you made it out of the 70s alive?